and Infrastructure Commission meeting of November 12th, 2020. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to
the republic
for which it
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And Cookie, may we have a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Reyes.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Here.
Vice Chair Nunez.
Here.
And Chair Rowinski is absent and excused.
Great. Thank you, Cookie. Just a reminder that due to the physical distancing protocols in place at this time, we continue to encourage public participation remotely at our meetings. And information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of the published agenda, which you can find online. And there are two ways to participate. You can join the Zoom meeting by clicking on the link at the top of the agenda and use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate time. You can also phone in to participate by calling the number 408-638-0968. Again, that's 408-638-0968 with the conference ID number 821-8731-4300 and password 706805 and press pound. You can then press *9 to raise your hand to be called on. And when called upon, press *6 to unmute, state your name, and provide your comments. These options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment period for that specific item. There's also general public comment for items that are not on the agenda this evening, and public comment is available on items on the agenda during consideration of each item. Our next item on the agenda is the consent calendar commission regular meeting minutes approval. Do we have a motion to approve last month's meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Cookie, do we need a roll call for these?
Yes, we do. Commissioner Reyes.
Aye.
Commissioner Robbins.
Yes.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Nunez.
Yes.
The minutes pass 4-0.
Thanks, Cookie. Our next item on the agenda is public comment. And just a reminder to everyone joining us this evening that state law prevents the commission from taking action on any matter not on this agenda, and your comments may be referred to staff for further review. Also a reminder to press *9 to raise your hand to be called on, and then when called upon, press *6 to unmute. State your name and provide your comments. So with that, Cookie, do we have any hands raised for a public comment?
Yes, I do. We have Drew, and I will, as soon as Drew starts talking, I will start the timer.
Great, and Drew has 2 minutes.
Do you want 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
We'll do 3 minutes for the public comment
at
the beginning. Drew, if you can unmute yourself and start speaking.
Hello there. So I just wanted to say thank you for publishing the passcode on the meeting agendas. It's so much easier to join the meeting via my iPad with the Zoom app. And I thank you for that change in the agenda modification and publishing that. That's it.
Thanks so much, Drew.
I also have Christy Egglestar.
Great, thank you. Christy, if you'd like to unmute yourself and start speaking.
Hi.
Christy, if you can.
You know what? Yeah, I don't know where she's. I no longer see her on here.
Okay. With that, are there any other hands, Cookie?
No, I see no other hands.
Okay.
Cookie, sorry to interrupt, but there is a phone number in as a panelist right now. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to chime in. But
Oh, is it for a hand raise or just a?
It's a phone number ending in 310.
Right. The phone number ending in 310, do you wish to speak?
You may need to press *9 or *6 to unmute. Okay. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda at this time. And we'll close the public comment period. The next item on the agenda is old business for the temporary storage containers in the public right-of-way. We'll receive an update and the commission will provide a recommendation. This evening, we will have a presentation from Nicolette Chan, Assistant Transportation Planner, and Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner with the city. We'll then bring it back to questions from the commission. We'll open the public comment period and then bring it back to the commission for discussion and comments. And then we will take a motion if needed. So with that, I'll introduce Nicolette and Sue Ellen for the presentation.
Thank you. It'll just be me presenting the presentation for tonight. So good evening, commissioners. My name is Nicolette Chan, and I'm a transportation planner for the city's Public Works Department. Tonight, I will be providing an update and staff's recommendation on how we can permit temporary storage containers in the public right-of-way. First, I will begin with some background information on temporary storage containers and how the city currently regulates them. Next, I'll briefly provide a review of the commission's feedback from the last meeting and present staff's recommendations, and then I'll follow up with next steps. So staff first presented recommendations for permitting temporary storage containers in the right-of-way to the commission in October. There was a need to permit storage containers to respond to the increasing number of requests for storage containers. Many of these requests came from residents who live in multifamily housing or who have small driveways and therefore don't have private property to store these containers on. There was also a need to streamline the permitting process for residents who may not be familiar with the encroachment permit process. The city's municipal code currently states that storage containers may not be placed in the right-of-way for more than 1 hour at a time, and they are not expressly allowed with an encroachment permit, meaning staff cannot issue an encroachment permit to allow a storage container to be placed on the street. In the comprehensive fee schedule, debris boxes and temporary storage containers are grouped together in the same fee, and that fee is $381 with a $500 deposit. This fee currently does not apply to temporary storage containers since the municipal code does not allow a permit to be issued for a container. Next, I will briefly review feedback from the October meeting and present staff's recommendations. There were concerns about the proposed $181 permit fee and $350 deposit, including that this fee may disproportionately impact low-income households. Commissioners also expressed interest in having a low-income waiver to waive these fees. Staff's recommendation is to offer a low-income waiver option for qualified low-income households. The eligibility requirements for this low-income waiver will be consistent with other city projects and programs. Staff also received feedback that the proposed 5-day limit may not support residents' needs. Staff conducted research on other cities that permit storage containers in the right-of-way and found that the majority of residents use a container for no more than 2 weeks at a time. Based on this, staff's recommendation is to allow containers in the public right-of-way for a maximum of 7 days. Commissioners also showed interest in allowing for permit renewals to allow containers to be on the street for longer than the time limit. Staff conducted research on other cities that permit renewals for containers. In the city of Burlingame, they have a renewal fee of $10 per space per day, and approvals for a renewal are contingent on verified complaints received. And in the city of Santa Monica, the renewal fee is about $51 to $52. Based on this research, staff recommend that we allow permit renewals for storage containers at a rate of $10 per space per day for up to 7 additional days, and that approvals for renewals be contingent on valid complaints received related to safety concerns, meaning that if the city receives a complaint about a storage container that it's creating site visibility or safety issues, then staff would not approve a renewal request to have that storage container remain on the street. Staff also received feedback on placement of containers, specifically in non-residential areas and on narrow streets. Staff spoke to the Public Works Traffic Division and Fire Department and recommend that containers be placed on residential streets only where on-street parking is allowed and on streets that can maintain a safe street width for traveling vehicles. We created 2 categories of streets to help guide which streets containers can be placed on. And so that first category of streets are streets with no center line and unmarked parking stalls. Containers will be allowed to place on these types of streets if a 12-foot clear path of travel can be maintained for vehicles. Using Flora Street shown here as an example, the street width is approximately 26 feet, and if an 8-foot container were to be placed in the parking lane, that leaves 18 feet for vehicles, which is more than the required 12-foot. So we would allow a container to be placed on the street, but only on the side of the street that allows for on-street parking. The second type of street is streets with a marked center line. Containers will be allowed on these streets as long as a 10-foot travel lane can be maintained. This section of Palm Avenue is an example of this type of street that has a marked center line. And this, I wanted to also show an example of a street where a container wouldn't be allowed. This is a segment of Indian Avenue. It does not have a center line and the parking stalls are unmarked, which means that it would have to meet the 10-foot requirement. And so the total street width here is approximately 22 feet. If you have an 8-foot container on one side and a parked vehicle on the other, there's only 14 feet left for vehicles. So we would not be able to fit a container on the street. Commissioners also suggested that the city should send the notifications to adjacent neighbors in the event that the container is placed in front of another residence. And staff recommend that the permittee provide the notification due to limited resources and staff time. However, staff can help with this requirement by providing a template notification letter on the city's website that the permittee can print out and give to the neighbors. Commissioners also showed interest in posting signage on the container, displaying the dates that the container will be on the street and contact information. And so the city's recommendation is to require a copy of the encroachment permit be posted on the container. And the permit does have the information about when the container will be on the street, as well as the permittee and city's contact information. In speaking to the fire department, staff also recommend expanding the conditions of approval to include that containers be in compliance with the 2019 fire code, which has a section on outdoor storage of materials, and restrict placement of containers in front of storm drains and fire department connections. Staff also recommend that we create a dedicated city webpage for temporary storage container information that would include how to apply, where containers can be placed, and the city's contact information for any questions or complaints. Following this meeting, staff will finalize the policy recommendation and present an ordinance to amend the municipal code and a resolution to modify the fee schedule to the city council early next year. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nicolette.
Vice Chair Nunez, this is Brad Underwood. Commissioners, I could just say I think staff did a really good job of answering your questions as you thoroughly went through the policy last time. So I'm hopeful tonight you won't have to spend a lot of time on this item, because I know you have a busy schedule, but by all means, if you do continue to have questions, please let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Duly noted. With that, I have no questions about this item. Thanks, Nicolette. Questions from Commissioner Lorraine?
I also have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Reyes?
I do have a couple of clarifying questions. One is the low-income waiver. If you could, for the sake of public record, explain what that is, what the eligibility is in the process. Number one, and then number two, I was a little bit confused by the Indian Avenue example where this would not be allowed. So maybe we could just review that. And my confusion there was I thought I understood that 12 feet was enough, but then I thought I heard that Indian Avenue 12 feet was not enough.
Yeah, I could say that again. So starting with the low income waiver, they would have to submit a proof of income documentation. And we do already have this option in our on-street accessible parking space policy. And so I believe we would imitate that. And so a proof of income document would be like a Medi-Cal card that's valid, or a woman, infants, and children voucher, eligibility letter from the County of San Mateo, for CalWorks or general assistance. And if someone did not have these documents available, we would accept a W-2 form and an income tax return for the household.
And for what? And what's the eligibility? So if someone submits a W-2, what's the income level that's eligible?
I'm not quite sure. Sue Ellen, I pass that over to you?
Hi, good evening, commissioners. We would be in line with the program that's currently offered for fee waivers, as Nikki mentioned in our on-street accessible parking application, and also Parks and Rec programs. The W-2 and income tax return for the household, I believe, would be compared to the median income level or the low income level for the county at the time of submitting that. The pay stubs would be evaluated in the same way. If there are additional concerns about how that would be calculated, we can provide clarification after the meeting.
No, I just think it needs to be clear, and so it sounds like we may just not have the information on hand on what the eligibility is, what the income eligibility is. So it just needs to be clear on the website, obviously, and I wouldn't mind a follow-up email with that information.
Sure. Yeah, and for your second question about the Indian Avenue, I got my numbers mixed up there. So for Indian Avenue, they would have to comply with the 12 feet for vehicles. And then that street width was 26 feet. And then considering the container and then parking on the other end, that would leave 10 feet. So that's below the 12-foot requirement.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Robbins?
No questions.
Great. We'll move to open the public comment period at this time. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
I have Drew.
Drew, if you could unmute yourself and start speaking, please. With 2 minutes, with a 2-minute limit for your public comment period.
Good evening again. Hopefully you can hear me. The unmute. Okay, great. Thank you. So one kind of clarifying comment, not really question. There were times the phrase space was used, and then like $10 for a space. And I think clarification around what a space is, because when I think of that, is that a parking space? And then someone puts a container, one of these containers across 2 spaces. So it's just what that word space means in the context of, are we talking a parking space, but there's not stripes, or like, in the residential areas, the parking spaces aren't normally marked as such. It's just people park and 2 small cars would get wiped out by 1 container type of thing. So it's just clarity around that, or maybe use a different word and stuff. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Drew. Any other speakers?
No, that's all I see.
Great. We will now move to close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission for additional comments. Commissioner Reyes?
I think we need to make a motion here, right? This is a formal recommendation to the council. Is that correct?
I didn't think so.
No.
Cookie, could
yes.
you provide clarification?
And maybe this is for Sue or Nicolette. Are you looking for a formal recommendation from the commission?
Yes, we are.
Okay, then I move approval of the staff recommendation.
Do we have a second?
And
I would
then
like to wait to make
discussion.
a comment first, please.
Yeah, I think we should have comments first.
Okay. Normally there would be a motion and then a discussion on that, but that's fine.
Okay, with that, Commissioner Lorraine.
I'll keep it brief. I just wanted to mention that I agree with Director Underwood that staff did a great job hearing the comments, taking down the comments from last month's meeting from the commission and the public, and I like where we are today. I think the revised policy is better, clearer, and I appreciate the work that was put into making it so, and I will move to approve. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, I concur. Excellent job. Captured all our comments and questions, and I think dealt with them fairly and appropriately. So I support this too. My only question at this point is, are we recommending that this policy go up to the council, or is it just that the staff put this policy in place?
Can
Brad or someone?
Hi.
This is an ordinance modification.
Go ahead, Sue Ellen. Go ahead, Sue Ellen.
Sure. The recommendation would be that staff take this policy to City Council, which would require adoption and also an amendment to the fee schedule.
Okay.
Great. My only comment, of course, echoing what all the other commissioners said, really appreciate staff's responsiveness and taking into account our feedback. And I think Drew brought up a great point about clarifying the space. I think it is just an important point to make. So with that, do we have a second to the motion?
Sure, I'll second.
I'll defer to Adam.
Hooray!
Okay.
Yeah, you get in the minutes, buddy.
Oof.
So I have a vote. Commissioner Reyes?
Aye.
Commissioner Robbins?
Yes.
Vice Chair Nunez?
Yes.
And Commissioner Lorraine?
Yes.
Motion passed 4-0.
Great. So we'll now move to new business. Our next item on the agenda is the leaf blower regulations, and Andrea Chow, sustainability analyst with the city, will be presenting. We will also be doing the presentation, taking questions from the commission, opening public comment, and then having a discussion amongst the commission. So with that, Andrea, take it away.
Great. I just want to confirm I'm sharing a full slide of my presentation.
Yes, and we can
All
see.
right.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, maybe it's not a full slide.
Yeah, it's the presenter view.
Okay, thank you. Give me one moment as I...
If you do it again and go to display settings, you can switch between the two. Oh, you got it.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, good evening, commissioners. My name is Andrea Chow, and I'm the sustainability analyst for the city of San Mateo. I'm here tonight to discuss leaf blower regulations. I also want to mention that Parks Director Sheila Kansian and Parks and Landscape Manager Ron Hostick are both in attendance of this meeting this evening, and I want to thank them for sharing all of their resources and experience with leaf blowers in our city parks. So that information was included in the agenda report and also in this presentation. Today, my presentation will review the impacts of leaf blowers in our community and the city's history with leaf blower regulations. We'll compare gas and electric leaf blowers and discuss how different cities in California address leaf blowers in their own ordinances. At the end of this presentation, I will ask for your feedback and discussion on leaf blower impacts and different policy options. The California Air Resources Board regulates, or otherwise known as CARB, regulates leaf blowers as part of small off-road engines category. Small off-road engines are defined as spark ignition engines rated at or below 19 kilowatts. These engines are primarily used in lawn and garden equipment, such as leaf blowers, lawn mowers, hedge trimmers, and chippers. Small engines combust fuel and also emit smog-forming emissions. Smog-forming emissions are distinctly different from greenhouse gas emissions, which is what I tend to focus on in the climate action world. But smog-forming emissions include nitrogen oxide and reactive organic gases. One of CARB's resources cited that 1 hour of commercial leaf blowing activity emits the same smog pollution as driving a 2017 Toyota Camry for 1,100 miles. Keep in mind that car standards have greatly increased over past decades, and so has small off-road engine emissions. They're still 40 to 80% cleaner than they initially were in 1990. Still, there are a lot of negative impacts to smog. Smog can make it very difficult for some people to breathe, and this is an emission that usually stays trapped low to the ground. Consider the Los Angeles Air Basin before our stricter California vehicle emissions were in place. CARB does plan to adopt new emission standards for small off-road engines by the end of this year, and they have an overall goal of requiring new equipment be zero emission equipment by 2028. In addition to smog-forming emissions, leaf blowers result in greenhouse gas emissions. Off-road equipment, according to our climate action plan and our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, accounts for 8% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. This category has seen significant reductions since our 2005 inventory. I took a look, and there's a 15% reduction from 2005, but this still definitely represents an opportunity for more GHG emission reductions. City staff hear the most complaints about leaf blower related noise. I think there are a lot more people working at home due to COVID-19, and so there's a feeling of a lot more noise pollution impact. And then finally, air quality is another related concern. Recent fires have created unhealthy and poor air quality that is often exacerbated by the use of leaf blowers that kick up dust and particles. And then in addition, the gas leaf blowers produce fumes or smog-forming emissions that I just reviewed. Currently, the city of San Mateo does have some restrictions. In our municipal code section 1080, operation of leaf blowers, we have established limits 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for weekdays and 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays. So we do have time restrictions for leaf blower use. We also prohibit the use of leaf blowers on Sundays and holidays, and require that leaf blowers run at low speeds and use nozzle extensions to minimize noise. These restrictions have been in place since 1997. In 2011 and through 2013, the city reviewed and researched leaf blower policies extensively. Staff reviewed a variety of other ordinances and conducted community and stakeholder outreach. Staff also researched electric leaf blower options, and park staff compared rates of leaf blowing versus sweeping and raking at different sites. So at that time in 2013, staff presented 3 options to City Council: improve enforcement of the current ordinance, establish a noise limit threshold, or implement a complete ban on leaf blowers. Ultimately, the City Council did not move forward with any of the options, and this was mainly because of 2 reasons. One was the impact on commercial landscapers, and the other was the challenges and cost to the city for increased enforcement. But specifically, the council was very concerned about the financial burden to commercial landscapers. And this was mainly because commercial landscapers are very small businesses that would hugely feel the impact of a new regulation, like banning leaf blowers. Encouraging the use of electric lawn and garden equipment is still included in the 2020 Climate Action Plan. This measure mostly focuses on outreach and education and an incentive program to transition landscapers to electric equipment. Little progress has been made on this measure due to competing priorities. Leaf blowers typically come in two kinds of styles, backpack or handheld. Backpack style leaf blowers are most commonly used by commercial landscapers. From a greenhouse gas emission perspective, electric leaf blowers can minimize greenhouse gas emissions since we have very clean electricity in our community. I did a little bit of research on trying to compare the noise from an electric leaf blower to a gas leaf blower. There was a study performed by the consultant group Arup that indicated that electric leaf blowers tend to be quieter because of the noise frequency component. Apparently, gas leaf blowers tend to have more of a low frequency noise component that travels further and can make them a greater nuisance because the noise travels so far and effectively. Still, I want to consider and highlight that a powerful electric leaf blower still might create just as much noise as a gas leaf blower. Electric leaf blowers do not create smog-forming emissions or fumes, but because they are still blowing air, they still result in dust and particles being blown up. And then there's also two kinds of electric leaf blowers. They can either be cord-powered or battery-powered. When you consider cord-powered models, that's likely less practical for commercial landscapers. Cord-powered electric blowers limit the range of use and are likely also not viable on all types of property. And then battery-powered electric leaf blowers would require commercial landscapers to purchase multiple batteries. So you have to think about the longevity of the equipment. So staff did a review of leaf blower costs, and it seems that handheld leaf blowers are very competitive, whether they're gas or electric. And I think this can be illustrated exactly in this graphic that's on the slide. But I'll dive in a little bit deeper. So electric leaf blowers that are the backpack style range between $300 and $1,100. That price includes the equipment and one battery. And that tends to be a bit more expensive than what I found for gas backpack leaf blowers, which range between $350 and $650. And I kind of already mentioned this piece about needing multiple batteries. So an electric leaf blower lasts roughly 2 hours before needing a charge. And so you would need to consider the additional cost of batteries, which range between $260 and $650. According to Popular Mechanics, electric leaf blower technology has become much more competitive with the gas models, especially in the household application. Again, this aligns with what CARB is finding. This is a graphic from one of CARB's reports, really showing that across the board on all types of lawn and garden equipment, there are households who are using electric models, whereas if you compare that to the one on the right, landscapers are still heavily relying on the gas models. So in our own city parks, we started a pilot 2 years ago in 2018 to use electric leaf blowing equipment at the Japanese garden. Initially, the equipment was difficult to work with because of the battery life. So staff had to troubleshoot with different battery models to find the one that worked best. Now, parks staff regularly use a backpack electric leaf blower at the Japanese garden, and they confirmed that the equipment can be used roughly 2 hours before needing to be recharged. And while this works well at the Japanese garden, I think when you consider how many acres our park staff have to maintain, this could pose a lot of challenges for maintaining all of our landscaping. In addition, city staff noted that electric leaf blowers tend to be less powerful, and therefore they take a little bit longer to accomplish the same work as compared to gas leaf blowers. So I was fortunate to review a lot of the City of Davis's analysis on leaf blower regulations, as they were working on their own leaf blower regulations in this past June. And a lot of their different policy analysis helped me put together a policy review, which I included as attachment 1, which includes a partial list of the different leaf blower policies in California. And we'll go over all of these approaches. So first, there are noise and or time of day restrictions, which the City of San Mateo does have in place. There are approaches that take on a temporary leaf blower ban on certain days. Then there's the gas leaf blower ban that does allow for the electric leaf blower. And then finally, a complete gas and electric leaf blower ban. Enacting noise and time of day restrictions is the most common approach employed by jurisdictions. 87 jurisdictions were identified using this approach. And this kind of policy really impacts managing noise pollution. It does less so in terms of addressing any environmental or smog-forming emission impact. And so, as I said, although the City of San Mateo does have time of day restrictions in place, the city could explore establishing a schedule or zone system to manage leaf blowing activity, or explore narrowing the time restrictions, or establish a decibel noise limit for leaf blowers. And I'll go into greater detail on these. The City of Burlingame's leaf blowing schedule and zone approach is the example I want to highlight for a zone approach. They've had this policy in place since 2012. And in summary, their ordinance requires that commercial blowers may be used on 1 day per week per area. And then there's an extra day for certain types of zones. And then residents can use their own blowers on Saturdays and Sundays during certain times of day, and then as well as on their assigned weekday. And then the City of Burlingame developed a map to delineate the different neighborhood zones and schedules, which is shown on the slide. So this policy approach really does a lot to address noise pollution. It almost kind of concentrates the noise pollution on certain days, but it also just reduces the number of days blowers can be heard in each neighborhood. I reached out to staff in the City of Burlingame to understand any issues with enforcement. Burlingame Code Enforcement indicated that over the past 5 years, they've seen 88 enforcement cases, and Burlingame staff said that cases are mostly easily resolved with the property owner once they were informed of the regulations. Alternatively, some cities have narrower time restrictions than the City of San Mateo. For example, the town of Atherton has a later leaf blower schedule that starts at 10 a.m. And then the city could also consider establishing a decibel noise rating limit for leaf blowers used within city limits. The decibel scale measures the intensity of sound and is a logarithmic scale. If a sound is 60 decibels and you add 10 decibels, the sound would be 10 times more intense. A whisper is about 30 decibels and a normal conversation is roughly 60 decibels. Often cities use the A-weighted decibels, dBA, a metric used for judging loudness corresponding with the hearing of a human ear. So for example, the City of Menlo Park has a 65 dBA noise limit, and the City of Foster City has a 50 to 70 dBA noise limit, depending on the type of zoning. So depending on, when you consider the impact on the community by establishing a noise limit, the restriction might require that those who own leaf blowers purchase new equipment that meet the noise rating requirement, whereas the previous policies would require mostly a behavior change. Temporary leaf blower bans address concerns about unhealthy air quality, but don't necessarily address concerns related to noise or emissions. I think these temporary bans are important to bring up because the Bay Area experienced such unhealthy air quality due to wildfire smoke and ash. And I know leaf blowers can contribute to poorer air quality by blowing up more of those particles in the air. So I think a good example of this is the city of Davis that just adopted an emergency ordinance to ban the use of leaf blowers in October when the air quality index, the AQI, was exceeding a certain threshold. For them, it was 100. They authorized the Director of Public Works to pause the ban and then reinstate the ban again if the air quality index exceeded a certain threshold. The City of Davis staff are still researching a more permanent leaf blower policy. The City of Menlo Park's leaf blower regulations, they have a time of day restriction, but they also have this provision where they ban the use of leaf blowers on spare the air days as declared by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And their restriction has been in place since 1999. And Menlo Park uses Nextdoor and social media to remind the community of the restrictions, but staff has mentioned when I reached out to them that it is difficult to enforce. So I think discouraging leaf blower activity on spare the air days and unhealthy air quality days makes a lot of sense, but might be difficult to enforce and would require commercial landscapers to check multiple websites to see if they could use leaf blowers on a given day. Banning gas leaf blowers helps reduce smog-forming emissions, but might only, again, partially address that noise pollution aspect. So by banning gas leaf blowers, jurisdictions do allow electric leaf blowers to be used. And so, I'll dive more into the examples. So 20 cities in California have adopted gas leaf blower bans. The city of Los Altos became the first jurisdiction in the Bay Area to institute a gas leaf blower ban in 1991. The Los Altos ordinance prohibits leaf blowers throughout the jurisdiction. And then in 2011, Los Altos actually considered modifying the ordinance to allow gas leaf blowers to be used on city-owned properties and in non-residential areas. There was a lot of opposition to overturning the ban, so ultimately the Los Altos City Council voted to keep the ban. And in spite of the long-standing ban, I think it was interesting to learn that there's a lot of issues with compliance. In 2019, the Los Altos Code Enforcement received 403 complaints regarding the use of gas leaf blowers. So it clearly remains an ongoing challenge, but Los Altos is actively working on educational campaigns to encourage compliance. More recently, in January of 2019, the town of Portola Valley adopted an ordinance prohibiting the use of gas leaf blowers. Portola Valley went through an in-depth stakeholder engagement process in the prior years, and they plan for their gas leaf blower ban to be effective January 2021. In addition to this, the town established a trade-in program to support conversion of electric leaf blowers. Their program launched in January of this year. The town of Portola Valley will rebate 40% the cost of an electric leaf blower purchase, or up to $120 if that person exchanges their old gas-powered model. All Portola Valley residents and landscaping professionals with a Portola Valley business license is eligible for the program. And I reached out to Portola Valley staff, and they reported 3 trade-ins as of yet, but the program was on hold for a good while due to the pandemic. So they're just resuming their program now. And then finally, the last policy approach, a complete leaf blower ban. An outright ban on all types of leaf blowers would require landscapers to use brooms and rakes. This approach has been adopted by a handful of cities, including Del Mar, Hermosa Beach, Laguna Beach, Manhattan Beach, and Santa Monica. This approach would fully address the greenhouse gas emissions and noise issue as well as air quality. But I think there would be significant impacts to commercial landscapers. Drawing upon the park study that was done in 2012, park staff went to various park sites and did a leaf blower session and then did a brooms and rakes session, and they found that brooms and rakes took roughly double the time to complete the same job. So it would really change how landscapers are allowed to operate and maybe what they would have to charge for their customers. Potential leaf blower regulations would impact personal household leaf blower use, commercial landscaping businesses, and city operations. It's also important to consider that each of these policy options have varying impacts in terms of addressing related noise pollution, air quality, and greenhouse gas emission reduction. Reevaluating leaf blower regulations would take a significant amount of time from staff to assess and implement, and it would have to include a robust outreach to both residents and commercial landscapers. Since this was an issue of the City Council previously explored, staff would also need further direction from City Council on whether to revisit potential regulations. If the Commission is interested in pursuing leaf blower regulations, staff will include this as an item for Council consideration and prioritization at the annual City Council goal setting session, January of 2021. So I guess this concludes my presentation tonight. I had created this graphic to summarize how each of these policy approaches impact these areas. And now I'd love to kind of end my presentation here and open it up for questions.
Thanks, Andrea. Questions from the Commission at this time? Commissioner Robbins?
Sure. Thank you. Great presentation and a great staff report. It was good reading through all that. One question is, there's sort of a list of pros, a list of cons. Do we have a sense of the efficacy between, gas and electric? I understand electric's improved. I've done a little bit of casual research online as a frequent user of power tools. Almost everything I do is electric these days. And it looks like they're pretty similar, but do we have a sense of the level of improvement?
I felt from my research in the personal household setting, they are very comparable, price-wise and power-wise. I think the most challenging piece for electric equipment right now is battery life and the cost of batteries for commercial landscapers. I bring this up again because I had to think through this thoroughly. If a landscaper is working a full workday, they don't necessarily have time to go and charge additional batteries for that day. So they're really out in the field for the day. And if a battery is estimated to work 2 hours, then they would need multiple sets of batteries, I guess, and those would need to charge quickly overnight, I guess.
Okay. In looking at other cities, is there anybody that's differentiated between residential and commercial? Actually, what I really mean is in terms of physical space. It could be commercial landscapers, but who are serving relatively small spaces like residential, as opposed to clearing Central Park or some giant commercial development, which is obviously a little more problematic. Has anybody made that distinction that you know of?
I can't think of an example, but that is essentially what Los Altos was pursuing, allowing, I think what you're suggesting is allowing gas leaf blowers in non-residential and maybe city-owned properties and
Correct.
Requiring electric and residential only. Is that what you're saying?
That's where I'm kind of leading. Yeah, thank you. It's okay. So maybe one spot has looked into that. Lastly, on my question list, have we, has there been any recent outreach to the landscaping community? I know we've got some very senior city people on this call, but have we talked to any of the landscape companies recently?
No, there was an outreach to the landscape community recently.
So we go back to that wonderful 2011 to 2013 period, which I was on the fringe of, so I know it was interesting. Okay, very good. Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Thank you. Andrea, I did have a couple of questions that I sent an email to you, and I apologize I wasn't able to read the response, so I am going to have to ask them again, and I apologize for that. But it's for the benefit of the public as well, so hopefully you'll indulge me. I do think I got at least one clue from your presentation about one question I had on what seems to be a discrepancy between the what we see from the California Air Resources Board report that you provided, part in the admin report about how much they're emitting as compared with vehicles, and that quite a bit of emissions are occurring. And yet in our climate action plan, when we look at the key metrics and how much we hope to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with our item, it seems a lot lower. Is that because the emissions that come from SORE are more of these smog-forming emissions that aren't technically greenhouse gases?
Yeah, that's correct. So I sometimes say emissions without saying what kind, but yes. So the small off-road engines create a lot of smog-forming emissions, which are distinctly different from the greenhouse gas emissions, which are being tracked in our climate action plan. So this type of equipment accounts for roughly 8% of our city's greenhouse gas emissions, which is an amount, but when you compare that to transportation greenhouse gas emissions, which accounts for 40%.
Excellent. Thank you for clearing that up. I'm curious to get a sense from you on the timeline on CARB's actions on this, and maybe get your thoughts on whether that it would be perhaps prudent to wait and see. I saw in your report that they may make changes to their policies by the end of the year, and so do you have any sense on what those changes will be, or why don't we start there?
Yeah, so when I did my research, I don't know a ton about CARB's regulating process, but I looked at a recent presentation that was done in June of this year indicating they do plan to tighten emission standards of the off-road equipment by the end of this year. I realize it's November now, so I'm not sure where they are in that process, but again, their goal is for zero emission equipment by 2028, which is a ways out. And so I think it's a tightening and ratcheting up of the emission standards to get there.
Indeed. And did you perhaps get a sense of whether if we were to take action on this and ask for the city council to make it a priority, for example, in 2021, that would line up well with these new updates?
It's hard to say, and I think I also need clarification on what kind of policy approach that the commission and city council are interested in pursuing.
Okay. Let me see what else. Yeah, another question I had, if you don't mind indulging me, about on the subject of prioritization, I guess I was curious as to what items and projects the staff currently has either committed to for 2021 or was planning to spend significant staff time on in 2021 to maybe give the commission and the public a sense of, if we were, for example, interested in making this a priority, what might be deprioritized as a result?
So here are some things that are sustainability program priorities for this fiscal year. One was something that you guys have seen a lot of, that is adoption and implementation of the city's REACH codes. The other is expanding public electric vehicle infrastructure. This one has been deemed a council priority, and that was looking into the county's disposable serviceware ordinance, which the commission reviewed last month. There's also been an interest in providing public outreach online, so remote online engagement. And then two other priorities for this fiscal year is electric appliance rebates and outreach for homeowners and property owners, and building efficiency, a building benchmarking ordinance.
Building benchmarking ordinance. So when you say this fiscal year, you're referring to what began in July through to the end of this coming June 2021.
Yeah.
21. And when we're talking about asking the city council for a priority, I guess because we're already halfway, the likelihood is that might get put into the fiscal year 2021 to 2022
yes.
sort of plan, right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe my question is about that, right? Like, just do you have a sense from the climate action plan standpoint, for example, of what might be what staff was maybe figuring? Did we have any other considered priorities for that fiscal year?
The ones I just named would carry over into the next fiscal year. And if I were to throw another one on there, I might add something around battery storage.
Excellent. You mentioned in the report that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District used to have a program for a lawnmower exchange. Do you have a sense of what the status of their participation in a program might be today or in the near future?
I don't have any indication of whether or not that program is opening up or what the status is right now.
Okay, those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Reyes.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Lorraine stole some of my questions, so I won't repeat them. But I think it's really important to re-emphasize that from a greenhouse gas standpoint, this is very, very, very small. So it is from an air quality standpoint significant, but not from a greenhouse gas standpoint. It's very, very small. But I think like many people, I also find them annoying. Nevertheless, I'm curious though, what our level of understanding is of the landscape businesses. Size, composition, my, informal impression is we're dealing with a lot of very small operators. Many are, kind of one truck shop, 2-person operations. Many are minority owned. The costs that we're talking about here, $300 to $1,000 for just one leaf blower. Is pretty significant costs. So maybe can you talk a little bit about what our understanding is of the businesses and what the impacts would be?
Yeah, Commissioner Reyes, I would agree with those those findings you just named, I did have some time to do an analysis on the city's business licenses for those who were registered under our landscaping services. And so we had roughly 100 registered landscapers. I'm not really sure like how comprehensive there is. Maybe there are more than that operate in the city. But it did give me an indication of their income, because the city's business tax is structured so that you pay according to your gross receipts. And so all of the, not all of them, but I think it was 75% of the businesses paid the minimum amount for the city's business tax license.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, I have no further questions at this time. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, Andrea, for your presentation. It was super clear, and I found the staff report to be extremely helpful. I'm curious, though, in your research, if you heard from neighboring jurisdictions about whether their noise limits and zone approach is abided by, whether it's difficult to enforce. The reason I asked is because I suspect this is very, very hard to enforce, and so I just wanted to double check on that.
So for the zone approach specifically, I talked to the City of Burlingame, and their staff indicated that there are some complaints, but that enforcement was fairly easy when interacting directly with the property owner to inform of the regulations. So I think my impression was that enforcement was less challenging for that approach. For the noise limit, I didn't ask specifically about Burlingame's noise limit, and I have not followed up on Menlo Parks or Foster Cities. I know, for example, Burlingame has a list on their website of the different equipment that complies with the noise limit, but I would imagine that it could be difficult to ensure an equipment meets the noise rating just from the naked eye or naked ear.
Right. Great, thanks, Andrea. That's really all of my questions. I think our other commissioners had a lot of great questions. I see Commissioner Lorraine's hand raised. Did you have an additional question?
I did, if that would be okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Andrea, I think there's another option that the commission might be interested in discussing today, which would be simply going ahead with some of the measures and ideas that came about as with the last update to what was then the Sustainability Commission in 2018, as you mentioned in the report, which I feel like are not necessarily taking action to modify our code, but rather to pursue the item OR in our climate action plan, the things like coming up with outreach and exploring an exchange program and stuff. So is that something that we might be able to pursue in 2021?
Yeah, so I guess I'll draw a distinction between what's in the climate action plan that's more education, outreach, and a possible incentive program on behalf of the city as like different from the policy approaches that would require city council approval that was the focus of the presentation tonight. But yes, I had a quick slide talking about how as part of our climate action plan, we want to encourage the transition to electric equipment from property owner standpoint or in commercial landscapers. And a lot of that it's more education and outreach based.
Right. And you mentioned that we haven't been able to make progress on that so far due to competing priorities. And certainly a lot's changed since then. A lot has happened since then that I could see as being competing priorities. We, merged two commissions. We had a climate action plan update and a bike plan update and so on. but can you maybe give us a revised sense of by when staff could pursue progress on those?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot of different programs that have timing that's sometimes unpredictable, but it is a measure of the climate action plan, so it is something that can be prioritized.
I guess I'm trying to get a sense of. All right. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
So at this time, I'll go ahead and open public comment for those wishing to participate in public comment. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
I have 2 speakers. Oh, 3 right now. Oh, there's more. Do you want me to do it at 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
2 minutes, please.
2 minutes. Okay, the first one is Ina Nosenko.
Ms. Nosenko, if you could unmute yourself and speak, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, commissioners, commission vice chair, and Ms. Andrea Chow. Nice to see you. We actually went to high school together, so very small world. So I just wanted to say I actually have a long list that I just wrote, but so I actually studied landscape architecture at Davis, and I am a landscape designer. I just wanted to go through some things that I kind of thought about. If we are trying to ease the burden on small businesses for landscape, will we be okay with allowing more pollution into our environment that will ultimately damage our ecosystem and environment? We already see how COVID has impacted small businesses. So can we have a buyback or exchange program for electric powered equipment for small businesses? Similar to something that was created for small businesses like a loan during COVID. I know that BAR is a program for cars, and that's a car buyback program, so maybe kind of entertaining that idea. As far as, let's see, I like the idea of having a decibel limit and a limit of hours. I know that in my neighborhood, I'm in an apartment complex area, and I almost hear leaf blowers almost every other day, so it is quite annoying. I do agree with Commissioner Reyes. I also have something to say about the quality of noise. Health air quality also needs to be factored into it, not just the pollution. Noise actually does have an impact on our quality of life, especially for those that are stay at home and working from home. There are studies that show noise quality does either improve or impact the productivity of work. And this is important since a lot of people are working from home, of course. I know that buildings for work and corporate, they are designed to have this into consideration when they are building buildings, looking at noise quality because it does influence workers' productivity. And also, I wanted to ask, what are the negative impacts that the other cities that you mentioned, Del Mar, Hermosa, Laguna Beach, Manhattan Beach, and Santa Monica had when they did only allow for rakes and manual uses instead of leaf blowers? And I was just curious how they handled that issue, if that was an issue for landscape companies. Yeah, I think that's...
Ms. Nosenko, I think if you could wrap up your comments at this point.
Yeah, that was it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Cookie, do we have another speaker?
Yes, Gabby Rathor.
Gabby, if you could unmute yourself and speak at the time.
Hello, nice to meet everybody. I just wanted to share my thoughts. I have spoken to a few neighbors. Actually, over the last month, it's been more and more neighbors, especially with being at home. I think that it was a really good presentation, and some thoughts that came to mind was the health of the landscapers. Even I think that they probably don't want that kind of environment. I mean, if you have a choice. So I think even if you were to switch to electric, for example, that'd be, easier on their health over time because it's every day they're doing it. And then the investment of going electric would mean you may have to buy a few more batteries or more batteries, a lot more batteries, but they're rechargeable and you don't have to keep buying gas. So I guess in the long run, it could maybe be a way to save money if we could find a way to make the investment for everybody work somehow. And the other thought that I had was the buyback options that you guys were talking about in the other towns. I thought that was really helpful because it kind of like gets a whole community together on this, and just more education and talking to our neighbors and gardeners about this, because I feel like just in that kind of line of work, being exposed to that type of, that kind of environment is really, can be another concern maybe to keep in mind. If we can pay just, even if you pay just a little bit more or something like that, it would be really minor compared to the kind of health that, the gardeners and the community, is experiencing. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gabby.
The next speaker is Frank there.
Frank, please unmute yourself and start speaking.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for this really comprehensive report, the presentation. It was very, very well put together. I was very happy to see that the economic factors were taken into consideration as well. And I liked very much the previous comment about taking the gardener's health into consideration. What puzzles me a little is that the report clearly states how unhealthy these things are, how impactful they are, yet nothing really has been done or changed to state. I have been reading through the ordinances, and I can tell you firsthand that these requirements are violated all the time, right? I sent a comment email, I linked 2 videos to it that I took, and you can see people running 2 blowers at the same time at full speed. You can see someone else blowing debris over the fence under the cars and everything. It's just this little, you sweep with a nozzle and the debris is someone else's problem. And would this not be enforced, there is really nothing that protects the community against this. I do understand that neighborhoods are impacted differently, right? In our corner, we have, like one of my previous commenters, we have this every day of the week. On most days, more than twice. Today, we had 4 instances where we had this noise and the noxious fumes going around. As the report states, the low frequency and the pitch of this noise makes this travel really, really far. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to the kids. It's a challenge to working from home. It's even, some of my neighbors have told me that their pets are turning into fruitcakes because they cannot stand the noise. So we need to find a solution to this. And I was very disheartened to hear that the commercial electric blowers are supposed to be as loud as the gas blowers, because at that point, they're really not going to be an alternative. I have one remark to Commissioner Lorraine remark about emissions. These gas blowers are... So these gas blowers are two-stroke engines, and they burn by far more dirty than any four-stroke engines, right? When I was young, I drove a moped. That thing was stinking everywhere. It's just a two-stroke engine by the same nature. So it impacts the air quality much more than a four-stroke engine, right? So again, thanks for your time. Thank you.
Next speaker is Carol Steinfeld.
Carol, please unmute yourself to speak.
Oh, sorry, the mute button is slow to show. I asked for this to be agendized because, as Adam noted, the Sustainability Commission discussed this in 2018, and city staff then presented some very low, politically risky programmatic options, which I was impressed by, and they're not happening, and they weren't included in this presentation. But leaf blowers, as others have said, are overused and abused here. A landscape worker at my previous rental told me leaf blower use is just expected by customers, and they're not really needed for much of his firm's work. And leaf blowers cost something not insignificant to operate, especially compared with rakes and brooms. But if it takes more time, do we really care? I mean, if my neighbor has to pay $10 more per month so that we neighbors don't have to suffer, I don't think that's a problem. We call that a green job, in fact. So on a side note on that, a Santa Cruz landscape firm maintains that firms like his are more profitable if they use rakes and brooms more than leaf blowers, and he's not spending any more time on those yards. But the key issue is that they're targeted in the Climate Action Plan. And in 2018, our sustainability analyst at the time presented relatively easy ways to try to reduce their use through public information. And that hasn't happened. We didn't take that up again. The topic of a ban like Palo Alto's, which is a ban on commercial use only, is really a whole other issue. So I really feel that this is where we start with communicating an expectation and maybe joining with volunteer groups to program it. This is an easy yes. I think we should start by telling the story of the alternative long before we talk about changing laws or regulations that need to be enforced. Thanks.
Thanks, Carol.
Jay Snyder.
Great. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Andrea, I want to thank you. I thought your presentation was excellent, and I really appreciate being heard on this issue. I'm a little bit confused at why it's the city's responsibility to concern itself with the sort of the costs or the profitability of commercial landscapers. The reason is it just seems an odd decision that we made last time around. And to me, it's sort of a false dilemma, because I really do think that the workers here are victims. This is not an anti-worker stance. I think if we're honest here, generally it's wealthier residents that are paying for gardening services, and the cheapest, most efficient way to use these, unfortunately, is damaging to the workers' health. And I think we all really need to not just be dismissive of the impact of the noise that these make on just simple pleasures of life. That is, taking a nap, taking a conference call. I mean, I think if you really listen and pay attention to these things, they're really pernicious to our beautiful city. So I think that we really should work on banning these. That's my stance. It's unpopular. I think we reflexively just sort of ignore how annoying these are. And last, I would just say, at the bare minimum, we need to steer ourselves towards the way Burlingame does this if we have to keep these things. Because right now, as I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong, that if you're in San Mateo, these suckers can operate from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday morning until Friday, or I mean, all week long with very little. And by the way, the previous speakers, I appreciate their comments because this is so unregulated. Persistently, they go past 5 o'clock. Every holiday, they're out. And you look like a lunatic calling into non-emergency 911 to report leaf blowers. So I beg you to take this issue seriously, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
I see no other hands raised at this time.
Right, so at this time, we'll bring it back to the commission for comments. Commissioner Reyes?
No further comments at this time.
Commissioner Robbins?
There we go. Sorry. Yeah. You know, I get a sense that among the professional staff and electeds in our city, there's a certain reluctance to go down this path. I know the efforts back 7-8 years ago, you know, was a lot of noise and wind, to pick up on a theme here, without a lot of positive result. But I think it is a real issue. I think there have been some changes in technology. I'd like to see us, with a couple cautionary notes, I'd like to see this get on a priority list, be brought up to the council, which would be my recommendation. That we bring it up to the council in their priority setting session, which is going to come up in January, to see if this can be revisited. I mean, you know, quick and dirty analysis, you know, pros and cons. The pros: reduction of noise, largely, reduction of pollution, and a less of a negative impact on the health of the users, which all those are pretty important. And I think it's an area that not only the speakers and all the emails we've gotten, I think it's an area where most of our residents run into this problem in a way that they may not other issues that are going on around in our community, because they're just not only working at home, but just out and about. You run into these things all the time. Obviously, on the con side, the electrics are not perfect. This is where I would be heading, towards replacing gas with electric. They still do produce some dust. I know there are some efficacy questions, how they're effective or not. But I think we should look into it. I think the council should go, you know, and direct staff to do so. I think some of the caveats, I think we should consider more outreach to the landscaping community. I've kind of noticed we've not heard anything from them in either the public comment or the emails that we've seen flowing. So I'd really like to see, you know, some of their views. I do think we ought to consider a focus on residential use in residential areas, not necessarily by residents, because they're, you know, paying outside commercial users to do it. But there is a distinction between residential spaces and large city and large commercial spaces, and that maybe the state of technology requires that sort of split. And I think we should also consider some sort of phasing in with economic support, the trade-ins. I will say anecdotally, whether it's contractors at our house or in the neighborhood, or from, you know, over the years, to solar that I just installed recently, there was a time when folks wanted to plug into my power. Now every contractor I know is using battery equipped stuff, and they seem to work fine. And they keep 2, 3, or 4 in their truck and pop a new one in, and they recharge pretty easily. So anyway, those are my thoughts, and that would be my recommendation. But I don't know if the rest of the commission will agree or not.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Andrea for putting this report together with some significant time, research, and findings, and to sort of bring us back up to speed with an update. I appreciate staff making that possible and putting this on our agenda after the public brought it back up and the commission mentioned it would be useful to revisit. I think this whole process is useful and appropriate, and I am certainly getting value out of it, and I hope others are too. Additionally, with regard to what I think might be the best next steps, it's my current feeling that now may not necessarily be the right time to pursue a ban or a significant modification to our regulations related to leaf blowers for a couple of reasons. I think the primary reason, the first reason that comes to mind, of course, is this CARB update. And it seems that we're a little ahead of this update that even in previous years when we discussed this, we were looking forward to, it seemed, or we're looking to see how impactful it might be. So certainly, I think the actions we would end up wanting to take could be informed by that update. So I would like to wait until that update occurs before we move forward. I think there may be, I would though like to see us pursue the 2018 staff approach to OR1 based on that update, informed by that update to some extent, and whether that's immediately in 2021 or somewhere else in the time frame of the climate action plan might be informed a bit by that CARB update. So I think another reason why now might not be a great time, by the way, is because we are in a pandemic, and I presume the council will have a number of high priorities, and as they when they do meet to discuss things, and I don't really see this being at near the top. Well, our commission may have other higher priorities as well that we may want to highlight. I think from a greenhouse gas emission reduction standpoint, for example. I think now that we've had a discussion in which it's been made clear that this is not exactly our highest greenhouse gas reduction next step, and the fact that there's that the state is taking action on this, I would personally disagree with Commissioner Robbins. I'm not interested in recommending this be a priority to council at this time. I do just want to thank Carol for her suggestions and agree that I think the 2018 staff approach sounds good and would be a good thing to move forward and just make sure is on the timeline at some point as appropriate. I like the idea of participating in the CARB Roadshow. I feel that staff, the city participates in other programs like it. And so, perhaps there's an opportunity to do an event in the not too distant future in that way. I would like to see us consider an exchange program so that we can, as has been mentioned, I think by the public and others, start off the process of communicating that it's better to go electric from an air pollution standpoint and perhaps even a noise standpoint, and start heading in that direction for now, and see what the CARB update has to note. Thank you very much.
Vice Chair Nunez, I'm sorry, this has stimulated some of my thinking, if I may make a couple comments.
Absolutely.
And first actually is a question, the CARB update, I'm sorry, Andrea, can you recap again what that CARB update, expected CARB update is?
The California Air Resources Board was expected to make an update on their emission standards for the equipment.
So that would affect new equipment coming onto the market in terms of the emissions controls, probably. That's what I would expect that would to mean.
That is what I would expect.
Yeah. You know, a couple thoughts to add in here. You know, one, I want to acknowledge the members of the community that have spoken on this. I mean, there's no question that the noise is a genuine problem, but it's not clear that electric actually fully solves that problem, because we're talking about the commercial leaf blowers, which are going to be larger and louder, although there may be some benefit. The health side, there's no question the two-stroke engines are horrible, and they're really bad for anybody in proximity to those things. At the same time, you know, I'm quite torn on this. I mean, the small businesses that we're talking about and the people that are working these small businesses are under, at this moment, extraordinary stress, right? Just unbelievable stress. It's not just them and their businesses. You know, all their customers are probably falling away. Other family members are losing their jobs. You know, they're on the knife's edge. And so, you know, if you're choosing between your health or, you know, putting food on the table, you know, that's the choice that many of these people face. So it's not, you know, it's not an abstract question of just, you know, putting money on the table and buying a few extra batteries. That money just isn't there. You know, at the same time, many people are working at home. The noise issue, I could imagine in neighborhoods where these are going multiple, you know, especially if it's multiple times a day, that's not just annoying, it can be quite disruptive. So, you know, I do agree with Commissioner Lorraine on the list of things that are probably going to council right now in the face of budget impacts and all the community needs that are happening. It's probably going to be difficult for this to be on that list. But, you know, I think, you know, there's the potential that this commission could start to look at potential things to recommend sometime over the course of next year that could then be brought to the council later next year. You know, that seems plausible. You know, to me, the things that would most interest me would be added controls around use in residential areas and something along the lines of the Burlingame model, which to me seem potentially reasonable and not too adverse from an economic standpoint for the businesses that we're dealing with. So it brings a little bit of some relief to the residential areas of the city. We could also entertain a little bit farther down the road, looking at business education in terms of what they are contracting for with the landscapers. So, you know, the Green Business Program could wrap in, hey, extra recognition or something, right, associated, hey, with then, you know, they contract for, you know, the greenest, cleanest landscaping services, right? Something on that order. So those are the kinds of things that I would be interested in considering perhaps, you know, at some point next year when we think that there's viability to bringing something to the council.
Thanks, Commissioner Reyes. You know, clearly huge interest from the community in this issue, and I want to thank the members of the public that, you know, wrote in for public comment and are here this evening, and appreciate Andrea's really detailed presentation, and I can see you taking super detailed notes. A very complex issue that we have in front of us here, one that I'm also very torn on. Just there's so many angles from the health and environmental and economic perspectives. And I do also want to underscore the point that Commissioner Robbins made, that, you know, we didn't hear from any of commercial landscapers this evening or in the public comment period of writing in. And so I'd like to just keep keep that in mind and keep the feedback that we've heard from them in past years in mind. But of course, recommending to staff to reach out and to see what the state of the field is, what equipment is being used at this time. It sounds like from Commissioner Robbins' comments that there has been significant or change, at least in observation of what they're using. And so I would certainly recommend us to reach out to commercial landscapers to understand that. Of course, the evidence is clear that these things are a net negative to our community, but it also is, you see CARBs taking significant action as soon as the end of this year and in the coming years. And so I'd also really like to kind of take an approach where we're following that lead, but doing things in the meantime that can be aligned with our kind of local context. Also underscoring Commissioner Ray's point that this is a significant change. If we were to make a ban on gas leaf blowers to the operations of our local vendors, and so we must have their buy-in for anything that we do. And so we would certainly need to now allow enough time and education, a buyback program to really establish kind of a robust behavior change program, because it just doesn't happen with just education and outreach. We certainly know that. I think that one thing, just given that all of these different angles and considerations, unless we move forward with a full-on ban for gas-powered leaf blowers with a buyback program and an education component, it would just be really difficult to make any progress here and to make sure that people are abiding by the rules. And I would just at this time hesitate to recommend that this would be on council's agenda, given competing priorities, given just such large economic impacts from the pandemic, both to the city and to our small businesses. And so I'd like to wait to recommend this item to council, especially to look at what CARB has done in the coming months. So like I said, I'm recommending to do outreach to commercial landscapers. I would love to see us explore what a buyback program would look like, just to incentivize businesses to trade in over the coming years. And of course, I know that this is a separate item from what's in the CAP, but seeing kind of the off-road equipment measures implemented, raising that to the top of the priority for this commission, at least in the coming year or two. But absolutely, this is a complex issue, and just really appreciating kind of all of the public comment and staff's attention to this. So I want to know if we need a motion for this item. I'm seeing no's. Okay.
Yeah, I see Commissioner Robbins. Maybe I have one more.
Robbins, did you have a comment?
Yes, I hear what the other commissioners say. So it doesn't sound like we need a motion, and I'm not going to make one at this point. I do want to just note, I worry that we're doing a disservice to our residents. We tend to focus on far-reaching, down the line, big picture items, reach codes, climate action plan, bicycle plans, all great things, but this is a significant problem that regularly affects the majority of the residents of the city. It's like potholes, and I think we neglect it at our peril. So I just want to put that in the record, and hopefully we can pick this up again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner Robbins. So hearing no other comments, thank you, Andrea, for your presentation. Did you have any kind of comments?
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much for the direction and the feedback. I have a lot of notes here, and I think there are some solid next steps that I can work on in terms of the climate action plan regarding off-road equipment. So yeah, thank you so much for the discussion.
Thanks, Andrea. So at this time, I'll move us on to the next item under new business, which is the South Downtown Residential Parking Permit Program, the RPPP zone modification. We will have a public hearing this evening, and we'll have Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner, with the city present. And I want to go through the public hearing order for this evening, which we will have a staff presentation by Sue Ellen. We'll have the applicant presentation. We will have commissioner questions for staff and the applicant. We will then have public comment, and then we will have discussion and a decision from our commissioners, and we will need a motion for this item. So with that, Sue Ellen, please take it away.
Hi, good evening. All right. Good evening, Commissioners. Sue Ellen Atkinson, Principal Transportation Planner with the Public Works Department. I'm presenting tonight on the South Downtown RPPP zone modification, the appeal of the Director's decision. Overview tonight, we'll be going through a brief history of the South Downtown RPPP zone, the application for zone modification, the denial of the application for zone modification, background on the appeal, and the staff recommendation. So for a brief history of the South Downtown zone, this zone was initially implemented to mitigate parking impact from the downtown San Mateo commercial district. Prior to 2017, the zone extended from 6th Avenue South to portions of Laurel Avenue and Rosewood Drive. In 2017, Public Works staff received a request for an expansion of the zone by residents on Rosewood Drive who wanted that zone expanded for the remainder of their streets. Following the favorable survey of residents in that area, the zone was expanded to include the remainder of Laurel Avenue and Rosewood Drive, a further portion of Palm Avenue and Hayward Avenue, and 10th Avenue was added at that time. So just showing you graphically, the red is the original South Downtown RPPP zone. At the time of the request in 2017, you can see that it extended south onto Laurel Avenue and Rosewood Drive. We received requests from residents on those streets to continue the program. So now the zone is inclusive of this orange area as well. Excuse me. The current RPPP policy and procedures were adopted by City Council in September 2019. In that policy included a process for zone modification or removal at resident request. Residents are required to submit a petition that describes the requested changes and the rationale for the changes. Staff will conduct a mailed survey to residents if the proposed changes are in keeping with the policy, and then a director's determination is issued on those findings. In keeping with that procedure, Mr. Deanna, the resident, submitted a petition during November 2019. His application requested division of the South Downtown zone into two zones. The South Downtown zone would be solely 6th Avenue to 9th Avenue, and then a new proposed zone that he named Glazen Wood Zone would include Laurel Avenue, Rosewood Avenue, 10th Avenue, Palm, and Hayward Avenues. The request for the modification is based on the division of zones by neighborhood as defined by zoning designations, and the division based on neighborhood characteristics of each area. The petition identified downtown San Mateo, the commercial core, and resident vehicles from the north portion of the RPPP zone as the parking generators that were behind the request. So essentially, again, going graphically, this blue line is what the modification request was intending to accomplish, splitting the zone into a north portion and a south portion. Staff reviewed the petition for compliance with the adopted RPPP policy. The petition was found to not meet the requirements for zone modification. The downtown commercial district is the non-residential parking generator for both areas, because both areas are contiguous. The housing located north of 9th Avenue is not considered a parking generator under the RPPP policy. Approved parking generators are non-residential in nature, such as schools, businesses, commercial districts. Therefore, the creation of the two zones would result in restriction of which residential vehicles may park in specified portions of the public right-of-way, and would serve to define where residents are able to park. The director's determination denying the zone modification was issued on October 22nd of this year. The RPPP policy also provides an option for the applicant to appeal the director's determination to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. That appeal was submitted and received on October 29th of this year. The key points contained within the South Downtown appeal from Mr. Deanna are that the applicant's neighborhood character differs from the northern portion of the RPPP zone, and that the proposed zone has different zoning designations and different housing types from the north part of the RPPP zone. So I'll go into a few points that Mr. Deanna made in his appeal and staff's feedback on each point. The first being the delineation of the RPPP zones. The applicant has stated that the streets that he's designated as Glazenwood differ in character from the other portions of the RPPP zone in South Downtown. Zones are approved to mitigate parking impacts from non-residential parking generators. They are not designated or delineated to make a difference between different housing types or zoning designations, and that delineation is not provided for under the RPPP policy. The appeal notes that the street should not have been added to the South Downtown zone, and that zone should not have simply been expanded. As noted previously in this presentation, in 2017, the existing South Downtown zone included portions of Laurel, Rosewood, and Palm. Based on that existing boundary, based on the fact that the program was already in existence on Laurel and Rosewood at the time when residents requested the expansion, and based on the fact that they shared an identified parking generator of the downtown commercial district, staff recommended the expansion of the existing zone and identified the program as a zone expansion in all of our mailings, in our public meetings, in the mailed resident survey, et cetera. Had an application been submitted to create a new zone expressly to delineate between different housing types and to exclude other residential parking, it would not have been approved because that's not provided for in our policy. And the third key point that I wanted to note is Mr. Deanna's appeal notes RPPP zone names and boundaries share a name with other identified neighborhoods in the city. Again, RPPP zones are created based on approved non-residential parking generators. They're not drawn based on neighborhood geography. They're not drawn based on zoning designation. So just a few examples to this point. Mr. Deanna noted the Aragon neighborhood RPPP. That's actually the Aragon High School RPPP. The high school is the blue star on the screen. That program was implemented to mitigate the impacts of high school students parking on street during the school day. It also does not include the full area noted as Aragon. Second is the East Downtown RPPP zone. That's named because it is east of our core downtown area. This and that is the non-residential parking generator for which this program was created. This program includes portions of two different identified neighborhoods, one being North Central and the other being Sunnybrae, and also includes different housing types. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the statement of decision and findings because that is one action that the commission is being asked to consider this evening. If the commission determines that the director's determination will be upheld, staff has a proposed statement of decision and findings prepared that was attached to this agenda item for your consideration, and that outlines the decision and findings in keeping with staff's recommendation. if the commission determines that the director's determination should be overturned. In that case, staff recommends to continue the item to a later meeting to consider policy revisions, and staff would need to draft a separate statement of decision and findings. In order to implement what Mr. Deanna has requested, staff would need to propose revisions to the existing RPPP policy. We would have to bring that back for commission review and recommendation to City Council, and then take the revised policy to City Council where they would vote on adoption. So just wanted to give a little brief overview of that portion of the request. So staff's recommendation is to conduct an appeal hearing of a residential parking permit program, RPPP, zone modification request, uphold the Director of Public Works' decision, and adopt a statement of decision and findings. And that concludes staff's presentation tonight.
Thank you, Sue Ellen. So at this time, we'll move to Mr. Deanna's presentation. If you could share your screen, Mr. Deanna, and unmute yourself.
Okay, can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
And we can hear you.
Okay, great. Good evening, commission members. I'm Doug Deanna, and I'm here to appeal the Public Works Department's decision to deny the Glazenwood neighborhood its own parking zone. And our appeal is based on the stated goal of the San Mateo Residential Parking Permit Program, which states, the goal of the Residential Parking Permit Program is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. And that is a theme that I will continue to bring up throughout my presentation. And during my time, I will explain why Glazenwood's petition is in line with the city's overarching purpose to protect neighborhood parking. I'll show the commission members there's a city precedent splitting a parking generator. I'll point out that we would have qualified for our own zone in 2017. I'll show that splitting this district is within the stated goal of the city's RPPP, and I'll prove that the denial fails to meet the stated goal of San Mateo's RPPP. And let me begin with the stated purpose of the San Mateo RPPP as approved by City Council, which reads, the goal of the Residential Parking Permit Program is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. If the intent of the RPPP as written is to protect neighborhood parking from non-residents, then our modification falls right in line with the city's stated purpose. The fact is that Glazenwood neighborhood residents have been impacted by non-resident parking from the neighborhood north of ours, for which we are seeking relief. Now, I know that Public Works denial says that the RPP zones are implemented to mitigate parking impacts from non-residential parking generators, and the designation of an RPP zone for the express purpose of delineating housing types is not allowed under the adopted policy. But that runs counter to the written and approved goal of your RPP, which states the goal is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. And the intent couldn't be clearer, to preserve neighborhood parking for those who live in that neighborhood. Now, in the Public Works denial letter, he indicates that the RPPP, again, is not about preserving neighborhood parking. It's about parking generators. And to paraphrase, the intent of the RPP program is to prevent vehicles from parking generators from parking in neighborhoods, and the zones are created based on the parking generator and not on the individual neighborhood or housing type. But if that were the goal of the San Mateo RPPP, then that's what would it have said, and I would have absolutely no basis to make a petition for the modification. But that is not what it says. It says this, that the goal is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. which of course is why I'm here today, because our petition and modification are right in line with the overarching goal of the RPP as voted on and passed by the City Council on September 16th, 2019. Now, even if we accept the fact that the intent of the program is to prevent the presence of vehicles from parking generators in residential neighborhoods, there's nothing in the policy that says two neighborhoods can't share the same parking generator or two districts. And there's already a precedent for that. The fact is, 4 San Mateo's RPPs already split the downtown parking generator with the North Downtown, South Downtown, East Downtown, and West Downtown. Glazerwood would be number 5. So on that note, our petition for modification is right in line, not only with the RPP's stated purpose, but also with your policy. Now, granting Glazerwood its own RPP zone would allow residents on streets in their to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents without delineating housing types as per your policy. Now, I think it's important to point out that if there were no South Down RPP zone, Glazerwood would have qualified for its own zone in 2017 when a group of Laurel Avenue and Rosewood Avenue residents petitioned the city to expand into the Southtown RPPP. Now, that's not me saying this. Sue Ellen Atkinson essentially said the same thing during the city council meeting on September 16th of 2016, and I will let her explain it in her own words.
Typically when we get an application for implementing residential permit parking, if it's contiguous to an existing zone, we typically expand that zone. So I understand the point that the gentleman made regarding his zone and the location and the context of that. If it's not contiguous, then it's a new zone. If it is an extension of an existing zone, then we do tend to just simply expand.
Mm-hmm. Something I want to think about, which drives home the point that we are already qualified for our own zone. If it's contiguous to an existing zone, we typically expand a zone. If it's not contiguous, then it's a new zone, which drives home the point that we already qualified for our own zone based on the downtown parking generator and our successful petition and survey. But for the fact that our neighborhood is contiguous to the South Downtown area, we'd have our own district. And what's more, the concept that simply tending to expand a zone because it is contiguous is not in line with the stated goal of the RPPP, which we should all know by now is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. So ultimately what you end up with is two neighborhoods in two different neighborhoods that are squeezed into one parking district. Now, as Councilman Bonilla pointed out during the same council meeting, just because neighborhoods are contiguous doesn't mean they should be in one district. And I'll let him expand on that in his own words.
Well, I do agree with Mr. Deanna's thinking that his neighborhood is significantly different from the adjacent one, that we need to look at the idea that just because it's contiguous doesn't mean it should be one district.
So let me expand on that again. Just because neighborhoods are contiguous doesn't mean they should be a part of the same district. And that has nothing to do with housing types, but is based on preserving neighborhood parking for neighborhoods, which is 100% consistent with the written and approved goal by City Council, which is 100% consistent. And this is the first thing that you read on page 1 of your policies and procedures guide. So let's review the background. Since Glazerwood has been a part of the South Down zone, I'll be the first to admit we have enjoyed reduced parking from commercial businesses. But over the past 2 years, we've noticed increased parking from cars outside our neighborhood, all of which bore the same parking sticker as ours. Cars that were parked for days. Neighbors at the end of Laurel and Rosewood have told me they couldn't park in front of their homes. And some people have reported people parking their cars and taking an Uber with a little visitor tag and left and it wasn't one of their visitors. And the story's going on, and I'm sure you've read all the letters that I included. And the residents of Glazenwood understand that nobody owns the parking space in front of their home. But our neighborhood should not have to serve as overflow parking for the neighborhood north of 9th Avenue. And this is why 80% of the neighbors on the affected streets signed the petition for our own RPPP zone, which again brings me back to the stated goal, which is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting non-residents. Now, according to Public Works denial, I can't make the argument that our 100-year-old Spanish colonial neighborhood is different in character, zoning, and housing type from the high-rise apartments, condos, and commercial zones to the north. That would be against the policy. But what is not a moot point is the stated purpose and goal that was approved by City Council, or that we could have qualified for our own RPP had we been a non-contiguous zone, not non-contiguous to the downtown zone, based on our own approved non-residential parking generator and successful petition and survey. And our petition and modification are the natural result of the program goal as listed in your program's purpose, which is why splitting the RPPP is right in line with your program's written goal that was approved by the City Council in September to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. The fact of the matter is, we are two different and completely different neighborhoods that have been simply squeezed into one parking district. But you don't have to take my word. You can see it with your own eyes by just walking around the neighborhood, that the neighborhood north of 9th Avenue is completely different than the one than our neighborhood south of downtown. And you can see it with your own eyes. But for the fact that the only thing we have in common is 9th Avenue, we could have our own Glazenwood zone. Now, accordingly, in Mr. Underwood's denial letter, he says that there's no rationale for a separate RPPP. Well, I might argue that there's no rationale for a denial based on your program's stated and written goal as passed by City Council on September 16, 2019, to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. I would go one step further, that there's no rational denial to that the denial fails to meet the written goal passed by City Council. So let me sum up my arguments to reject the denial. Our petition for modification is in line with the stated purpose and goal of the RPP. We are two completely different neighborhoods squeezed into one district. Glazenwood met all the requirements for our own district in 2017. And if there were no downtown zone, we would have our own zone, as we have an approved non-residential parking generator and an approved survey. And 80% of our residents have petitioned for the zone. Now, if you agree with me that our petition for zone modification is in line with the stated goal and intent to preserve neighborhood parking for those who live in the neighborhood, then your choice is clear. Reject Public Works denial and instruct the department to either one, consider the zone modification simply as an adjustment to our successful survey and petition, and grant us our own parking RPPP, or instruct Public Works to move forward conducting the neighborhood survey. Your decision would be 100% in line with the stated goal passed by City Council to allow residents to park on the streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents. And this is what 80% of the Glazenwood neighborhood residents are requesting. And this is what the San Mateo Parking Permit Program written approved goal calls for. Now, should you choose the second choice, I would ask that you survey only the residents on the affected streets and not the entire zone. And it all comes down to the math. 50% of the survey cards need to be returned and 67% of the residents must vote yes. When you consider there are twice as many residences north of 9th Avenue, those residents wouldn't even have to return the survey card, and our petition would lose because every non-returned survey card is considered a no. And I I would ask that should you request that Public Works do the survey, that at least we have the survey mailed 3 times due to the mailboxes being jammed with junk mail. A small 5x7 card could easily get tossed in with the junk mail and tossed out. And there is a precedent for that. Public Works mails 3 reminder cards during the renewal period to give residents adequate notice. And this important matter is equally important. In conclusion, I'm hoping that you can see that I've made the case for rejecting the denial, and I look forward to your positive response. One final note. In the packet that Public Works sent to the Commission, I see they sent you a pre-written draft of your denial. And I'm hoping that my presentation today will shed new light on our appeal, to give you some new facts and ideas to consider that were not a part of my written appeal. And I hope you'll carefully weigh these facts before you and ultimately issue your decision, because your decision is final. And our neighborhood will have to live with your decision forever. I want to thank you for hearing our appeal, and I look forward to hearing your positive response. And I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deanna. I will now bring it back to the Commission for questions for staff and the applicant, but I want to ask commissioners to be clear in who their question is directed to, whether that's staff or to Mr. Deanna. And so, Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, I would like staff, and I don't know if it's maybe the City Attorney Sean Mason or Brad Underwood, somebody to give us a little guidance as to maybe it's Sue Ellen to process. So this is a final. It's a quasi judicial review, and I don't want to over lawyer it, but I'd like to just make some guidance, get some guidance, so we know, how we handle this without overstepping our bounds or somehow shirking our responsibility.
Yes, I will jump in and answer the question. This is Sean Mason, City Attorney. So I think the task for the Commission is to review the application against the standards that are in the policy that was part of your packet, and provide your own interpretation to those standards, and to determine whether the facts support the request or the denial of the request as outlined by staff. One point that I would make is that the speaker indicated that the decision is final with the Commission. It is not. There is the possibility for appeal to the City Council of the Commission's decision.
I understand. I don't know if I get a turn to I don't know how to do the raise your hand, but I understand if we wanted to appeal, we would have to get an attorney and have a writ. And is that correct? Or how would we appeal to the City Council? Hello?
An appeal to the council would not require an attorney, and it would not involve the issue of the filing of a writ. That's a court procedure.
Okay, because that's what I believe the city manager might have mentioned to me.
This is Gabrielle Whelan, Assistant City Attorney, and I've been counseling Public Works on this matter. And they had asked me whether this decision was final with Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. And I had advised that it was, based on the fact that the municipal code doesn't provide for any further appeals after the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. So that's the background, but I'll defer obviously to the city attorney.
Yeah, while the code doesn't provide for appeal procedures, the charter provides that all boards and commissions are advisory only and can be appealed to the council. So the council would be the final maker on appeal.
So at this time,
thank you. That was my.
Did you have?
Yeah, no, that was my main question. I've got comments, but I'll wait and see if anybody else has any other questions. Thanks, Sean. and Gabrielle.
Commissioner Loring.
Yes, thank you. My first question is for staff, and it's about a claim made by the applicant in his presentation that we have currently 4 downtown zones that all use downtown as its non-residential generator. Is that correct?
That is correct. The 4 zones that were noted by the applicant are the zones that are respectively to the north, south, east, and west of the downtown. So they're not contiguous, and that is why they have different zone designations. If I could share my screen for just a moment, I can show the map of those downtown areas. So you'll see that the main downtown is right in here. And you've got north, south, east, and west downtown zones, and those are all delineated by their geography to the downtown.
Okay, so would you say that the main difference between this application and a hypothetical application in the past of one of those other 4 zones would be that it is in fact contiguous with a previously existing zone?
The difference is that the existing zone was already implemented on the streets that we're asking to be part of the program, and that's why the zone was extended. In the other RPPP zones, if we receive a zone expansion request or a request to join a zone from a street that's adjacent to an existing zone, we will expand that zone. The 4 zones around the downtown have been in place for quite a long time, so I unfortunately can't speak to their creation, but when we do receive requests from streets that are adjacent to those zones, they are expanded.
So by that, would you say that if another area, actually, Sulan, would you mind showing that slide for another moment, please?
Trying to make it a little larger.
I think this would be a helpful visual aid. So thank you. So based on that, if some of, let's say, the north central neighborhood around Monte Diablo, Elm, slightly north of, I guess, what would be the north central, the north downtown zone, were to apply for an RPPP, would it similarly not be allowed to have its own zone and instead be considered for an extension of the north downtown zone?
That would depend. If we received an application from the Monte Diablo area, because it's not directly adjacent, when we receive an application, we do look for where parking overflow or spillover might happen, and we survey those neighborhoods, those streets also, to see if they would be interested in being part of the zone as well. Because if we were, for example, to implement on Monte Diablo here, which is separated from existing zones, there is potential that the parking would spill over onto these streets that are contiguous. So at that point, we would look at the survey results to see what areas and what street segments are actually meeting the criteria to be part of the program. Part of the reason for doing the expansion on the contiguous streets is for enforcement purposes, for clear signage and for people knowing where they are allowed to park with their permits. So having 2 zones that are directly adjacent makes it very difficult in terms of enforcement and clear understanding for residents. So if only Monte Diablo and North were interested, if neither street between San Mateo Drive here were interested, I think we would consider a different zone because they're not contiguous. There is a clear start and end for enforcement purposes. But if it were to start right where North Downtown is currently, then I think that we would consider that a zone expansion.
I don't know how to raise a hand other than like this. Can I make a comment, or how
Mr.
do I?
Deanna, can you hold your comments until after the commission has asked their questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner, do you have any other questions?
I do, thank you. In the draft commission statement that upholds the director's decision, there's a note that reads, staff conducted a parking occupancy study of the streets in question and found ample on-street parking available during program enforcement hours. No modification of the program is indicated to provide parking availability. When I was just curious when this was conducted, and if staff could provide any more like high level details on that, as for example, like, is this typically done as part of the an application or extension? And
I'm going to stop sharing this if that's okay. That works. Staff, when we were evaluating the application, we wanted to determine if there was a parking availability issue in the neighborhood, and both in the northern portion and in the southern portion. And to do so, we did conduct some informal parking occupancy surveys driving throughout the zone during enforcement hours, weekdays. We were trying to understand what the concerns were. And on all of those instances, we did find ample parking availability. The parking occupancy was roughly about 50%. There were plenty of available spaces during enforcement hours. And that's an indication to staff that the parking restrictions that are in place are working. Any vehicle can park on street for up to 2 hours with no permit in any RPPP area. There are concerns about vehicles that are parking for more than 3 days. We have a citywide ordinance that addresses that through other means than the RPPP program. Further, if there are issues with evening and overnight parking, RPPP is not the mechanism by which to address that. So we went during RPPP enforcement hours, and we found plentiful parking, particularly on Laurel and Rosewood.
Yeah, and this is Brad Underwood, Director of Public Works. I want to add to that because I personally made some trips out there several times to assess that. And I found that there was the availability was like 60 or 70% in this particular neighborhood streets available during the times that I visited. And it was various times during the day, of course, during the program hours. So there really is no issue with this. What I find from that observation is that the program is actually working as it's intended.
thank you. If the RPPP cannot provide parking relief in the way Glazenwood residents seek, what other options might be available to them? What might you recommend? Are there other alternatives that staff would recommend pursuing?
If the concern is vehicles parking for many days at a time, the San Mateo Police Department has a vehicle abatement program by which residents can call or submit an online form for vehicles that are parking for 72 hours or more. So that's one avenue. There was a concern, I don't recall which document it was that Mr. Deanna had submitted. There was a concern about the streets being narrow and parking on both sides of the street, causing concern, safety issues. In other streets where residents have brought up that concern, we've evaluated removing parking on one side of the street. That would be an option if parking on both sides of the street is a concern of the residents. In terms of parking in the evenings and overnight, we don't have any city programs, any parking restrictions that would address that in a residential area. Streets are the public right of way, and any person has the right to park there if they're abiding by posted restrictions. So those are just a couple of thoughts off the top of my head.
Thank you. One last question. Is there any response to a number of requests we received in public comments on this item for a stop sign or intersection at 9th and Laurel? Is it in the central neighborhoods traffic action plan? Has it been noted, or would these residents need to take any extra steps to appropriately make that request?
I'll have to defer to Brad on that one. I'm not familiar with that.
I believe that request has been received by the traffic engineering group, and I'm not sure if they've run the study on that request or not. I haven't heard back from staff on that. There is no other request. We're aware of the request, and what that would be is a formal multi-way stop study to see if it met warrants per California state guidelines.
Okay, but I think just, you know, it's they don't necessarily need to. I'll leave it there. I appreciate the response, and those are my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Robbins, I see you had your hand raised. I wanted to make sure if that was from before. Okay, Commissioner Reyes, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Diana.
Yeah, thank you for both the presentations. And in reviewing the letters, there are a lot of different things in the letters, and I think one of the things that makes this a little challenging is some of those concerns appear not to be material to this particular question. But I'd like to invite Mr. Diana to speak very specifically. You know, what is the assessment of the problem? So what is driving the request here? Because that wasn't central to your presentation, and I know that there's written material, but I'd like to invite you to speak to how you and the neighbors in the neighborhood see what exactly the problem is.
Let me start back at the beginning of September when I made this comments to the city council. And then I organized the neighborhood because we had been flooded by many cars north of 9th Avenue. So you'd try to park in front of your house and you'd see other cars with the same parking sticker that you had, but they were not your neighbors. And so that was the beginning of how it all started. Where did all these cars from? And let me jump over here to the enforcement action. Everybody has a parking sticker, and everybody's parking sticker is the same. And so what we found is that we found people who weren't our neighbors parking in our neighborhood in front of our houses and occupying spaces. And you have to remember, I don't think it's fair that they conducted a survey in October of 20 when I filed this in November, and we're in a COVID lockdown. And I was promised that they would do the study in January after the first of the year. January, no study. February, no study. March, no study. April, I get a note. Hey, we have to put it off. It's a different world now because of COVID. Yeah, there may be reduced parking, but the problem is still there, and it's going to come back. This was a huge problem at the beginning of the year, and that was essentially. I hope I answered your question. That what's the nature of it? The nature of it is we're a small little neighborhood. We've got twice as many residences north of 9th Avenue, and our neighborhood is now used as overflow parking. And my whole appeal is based on the city goal is to provide neighborhood parking for people who live in the neighborhood, and the cars are not from our neighborhood. And one of the things that Sue Ellen had mentioned, I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that Sue Ellen had mentioned that had gotten me was this quote, you know, if a neighborhood is contiguous, we tend to just expand. And I'm not sure in the policies that you have that tending to expand is a part of the policy. if your goal is true, that we're going to, how does it, if I said it 16, I should remember it like the preamble to the Constitution. If the goal is to allow residents to park on streets in their neighborhood while restricting parking by non-residents, then, quote, tending to expand, mixing two neighborhoods, that goes against whatever your goal is. And as for enforcement being too difficult because there's one area and another area, if everybody has a parking sticker, if you've ever seen, have you guys ever seen the parking stickers for San Mateo, for parking district? They're all the same color. I can go park in Aragon, Burrell, wherever, and that guy who drives by in that car, you think he's going to stop to see mine says South Downtown instead of North Downtown? It's real simple for enforcement. You buy different colors. It's real simple. That way there's no question about it. Now, again, as for the study, the quote, informal study, well, I would request that they do a formal study. You know, this is too important to our neighborhood to just say, hey, well, we drove by. You know, I drove by the afternoon. To address the point of the commissioner who asked about the stop sign, that's been addressed. And it's been addressed. I talked to Tom on the phone there, and he's going to look at putting a different line of a red zone where we can't see. So I just want to make sure that's been addressed. But you know, ultimately, we have become overflow parking for the neighborhood north of us. And
so I just to take back, to continue on some of the comments, and some of these may be going to staff. So thank you, Mr. Deanna.
I hope I've answered all your questions.
Yes, thank you. So, you know, what we see in the letter is a range of different things. You know, safety concerns on Laurel and 9th, you know, cars speeding, cars there for multiple days, and then this, you know, the other comment here, Mr. Deanna, that you offered, unable to park in front of one's own home. So, I mean, you know, the first 4 or 5 of those are fundamentally different issues, right? So they cannot be enforced through this process.
I didn't write those letters.
Right. These are the I'm speaking to the letters that we've received. So there does seem to be some conflation and possibly some confusion about what the parking permit would do. It's not going to solve most of the problems referenced. And you know, I would note that I think all of these homes have garages and driveways. So it's not that there's a lack of parking. There's actually probably an abundance of residential parking in the neighborhood, at least so it seems. And it just to be perfectly candid, for me personally, not being able to park right in front of the house, you know, doesn't seem like a terribly high, you know, need relative to how, you know, all the administrative elements that need to be considered here in terms of the program. So I'm just trying to understand where the problem is, and it seems like actually quite a few of the things that are being referenced need to be addressed with other mechanisms, not the mechanism that we're talking about here. So that's just my observation, and you know, I would welcome staff commenting on the other enforcement needs here, and they've been spoken to before. But I certainly would be interested in hearing about you know, the potential to address the stop sign issue on 9th and Laurel, and if there are opportunities to take a look at some of the other enforcement issues, which may be, you know, legitimate as well, in terms of you know, speeding or vehicles being there overnight, and so forth. So I don't know, Brad or Sue Ellen, if you want to speak to those.
I will address it in this way, and that's really not what's agendized tonight. I agree with you, Commissioner Reyes, that there was a lot of things in the residential letters that didn't really relate to this, and we will, you know, for instance, about the residents or people leaving vehicles for days. We will reach out to the community and let them know the policy and procedure regarding that and how they can handle those issues if they see that in their neighborhood. I think Sue Ellen talked about there was concerns about the narrow streets and people having to pull over. If the community would like us to eliminate parking from one side of the street, we're happy to look into that for them. And then there was one comment I wanted to point out that you, I don't know that you stated, was that there were some who thought the new apartment complex closer to El Camino was included in the zone, and it's not included in this zone. So residents of that apartment complex do not receive any parking passes for this RPP. I don't know
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. The one other comment that I would make is that is the document on the policy is not a contract. At least that's not how I read the document. So the term neighborhood there, yes, I can understand why it would be subject to interpretation, but if it were written as a contract, it would probably be written differently. And so, you know, there may be some merit to clarification, given you know, this discussion here. You know, and the, you know, what's really seems to be driving this conversation is how to read the term their neighborhood. And neighborhood can be, you know, interpreted broadly. That appears to be how the policy is being applied with the other PPP zones. So I appreciate the historic character here of that Mr. Deanna is speaking to in terms of this neighborhood. I don't think that use of neighborhood is synonymous with the use of the neighborhood in the policy document as it exists today. Again, it's not written as a contract. It's written as a layman's document for layman understanding of what the general policy is. So that's that. You know, I don't know, Brad, if you want to comment on that, or Sean.
Yeah, no, I'd be glad to comment on that. Thank you for that recognition, because you know, that's really what Mr. Deanna hangs his hat on, is the initial purpose statement that's involved, and saying that the council passed a document, which they did, but what's being ignored in that statement is really how do we what are the procedures involved in developing these zones. And the key procedure is there's got to be a generator that's a non-residential generator. And so those homes and apartments and condos and so forth north of 9th Avenue are residents. So we view them as part of the residential neighborhood, part of the area there that can park on the residential streets. As we know, the right-of-way, you know, belongs to everybody, and specific homeowners do not own it, nor are they entitled to more benefits of that right-of-way. So, you know, people living north of Night are part of the same generator, being the downtown, and so the residents are of the same area as well. So I agree with your statement. Maybe some more clarity on that purpose, because we really are trying to follow the whole document and not just piecemeal it.
Thank you.
At this time, hearing no other comments, I'd like to move us forward to the public comment period. Do we have any comments?
No, I see no hands raised.
Great, so I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and decision. We'll start with Commissioner Robbins.
Thank you. I've enjoyed listening to all this, and I did want to make it clear that, as Sean very kindly did, that indeed this thing's appealable. I'm a veteran of not only this commission, but of Parks and Rec, and nothing quite like his heritage tree determinations and the appeals up to City Council. I know I can get a smile from Sean on that one. But on this one, I think it really comes down to something that Commissioner Reyes pointed out. It's really about an understanding of what non-residential means. And it doesn't mean somebody who lives outside of your little zone of residence, your house, your block, your 5 blocks. Both my reading of the policy and the city code, quite frankly, as well as having been involved in this program and looking to modify it and expand it over the last several years. The idea is that non-residential means not neighbors or locals who live in or nearby, but it's intended to address cars from people who drive in from other possible purposes who are not resident in that surrounding area. And that's what is meant by the, I think the term is parking generators, but it's schools, it's commercial and business locations. And I may be wrong on this one, but I think we had this whole issue involving a church as well, St. Matthew's, that whole neighborhood. So these are parking generators, is actually kind of an interesting term. They're magnets, there are establishments that people drive in from their residence to come to and park in the surrounding neighborhood and cause problems that way. So that's why we put this program in place. So I think basically a misunderstanding of that term non-residential is what's at play here. And reading it as I think it should be, I do think we have to deny this appeal and uphold the director's, the Public Works Department's determination. I think the alternative would be very troubling. Just wanted to note we'd be isolating, islandizing higher density housing. I could see that up and down El Camino, the folks in Baywood, the folks in my neighborhood of San Mateo Park. Next thing you know, people who live in those apartments up and down El Camino, you know, their stickers are only good for half a block into our neighborhood. I just think that that would fly in the face of the intent of the policy and also be very problematic. So that's my 2 cents on here, and I'll let others speak, but that's it for now.
Thanks, Commissioner Robbins. Commissioner Reyes?
I would also support the staff position on this. I have no further comments.
Commissioner Loring?
I too essentially agree with my fellow commissioners who have already commented. I do empathize with Glazenwood residents on issues with nearby parking availability. I live in North Central, and it's you know, it's certainly not guaranteed to find a parking spot near, you know, directly adjacent to one's home. But that's, you know, one of the issues in the city of San Mateo in 2020, and it's one that requires a number of solutions, and unfortunately this RPPP is not one of them as far as I can interpret. The non-residential term would be key here, and though the purpose wording that was displayed many times seems to have grander ambitions, you know, I think the director's decision is correct, and I think the unfortunate conflation of generators and how to deal with it is leading to this perhaps potential confusion. But I agree that I agree with the findings of the director.
Thanks, Commissioner Loring. You know, I really empathize with Glazenwood residents, but I think the RPPP policy speaks for itself, and how the goal is achieved. The zones are not created by housing type or with attention to neighborhood character or the definition of a neighborhood, and housing types and neighborhood character should not determine residents' ability to park in the right of way. And so I think accommodating this request would have unintended consequences, like Commissioner Robbins mentioned, and I'm not necessarily interested in modifying the purpose of the RPPP. And so making decisions of access based on housing type is not something that aligns with our city's values of inclusivity, and we should really hold ourselves accountable to that value. And of course, making an informal assessment of who your neighbor is and not is certainly not in line with that. And so I wouldn't want to set a precedent for other neighborhoods to do the same process. And so I would like to ask staff to work with the Glazenwood neighborhood to look at options for mitigating some of the impacts listed by Mr. Deanna. For example, cars that are parked on streets for a long time or other impacts mentioned. I think it'd be worth following up on those items. But I will be recommending to uphold our director's decision.
Well, I was hoping I would at least turn one chair. Anyway, thank you for this a fair hearing here. And I appreciate the time and effort that everybody's put into this. And I just want to thank you. Unfortunately, we didn't go in my direction, but that's how it always works. But again, I want to thank you guys for giving it a fair hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Deanna. So at this time, do we have a motion to uphold the director's decision?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And for clarity purposes, that includes the statement of findings that were part of the packet.
Yes. So to uphold the Director of Public Works decision and adopt a statement of decision and findings.
We have a vote. Commissioner Reyes.
Aye.
Vice Chair Nunez.
Aye.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Aye.
And Commissioner Robbins.
Yes.
Motion passed 4-0.
Thank you all. I'll move us on to reports and announcements for this evening. Does anybody have any reports or announcements? I saw Commissioner Lorraine's hand.
Yes, thank you. I have one sort of report. I want to thank Cookie and staff, Sue Ellen, for sending information to the commission about upcoming events that might be of interest to us, including the recent Office of Sustainability event related to heat in the time of COVID and working from home, and the CCAG's workshop in which they described their backbone of bicycling and pet infrastructure. And I attended the CCAG one. Unfortunately, I missed the Office of Sustainability one, but I would say please keep doing that if you happen to have a moment and the inclination. I appreciate it very much. It's always good to learn about other things that might be happening that might be of interest to us. And I found the CCAG one to be interesting indeed. And I would further ask the public to consider taking a look at the CCAG's bike web map. They are taking comments until Monday, November 23rd. So please take a look at bikewalkccag.com. That's CCAG. And take a look at it, and you have the ability to make comments on it until then. And I think I had a sort of a comment related to the crystal ball. And I just noticed that I was wondering whether we could add to it the next quarterly bike ped update, and whether it might be possible to do it in January or February.
I'll respond to that. Yes, that is possible. We'll look at which where it fits in best. I think we committed to coming back to you 3 times a year for the bike updates, if I recall.
Okay, I think I don't think it has to be in January, but I do think if it can be in February, that would be wonderful. And additionally, I wanted to present a proposal to the commission about another potential item that we could pursue in December, which would be based on a little of the discussion we had during the leaf blower item. Is there a possibility to have an interest to have something like a 2021 outlook, sort of like an extended crystal ball, maybe, discussion and prioritization? I wondered what other commissioners might think of that, and whether there might be room for that as well.
Commissioner Reyes or Robbins, or any interest in that?
I'm sorry, Adam, I apologize. Can you repeat again the request?
Yeah, so in the leaf blower item, I think there was this question of asking the council to make modifications to leaf blower regs a priority. It got me thinking a little bit about what are our current priorities for the upcoming year in 2021. In the past, the Sustainability Commission. Yeah. So I wondered if there might be an opportunity to have a discussion with staff on that in December.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent recommendation. And if I understand the suggestion, then we would use that to perhaps make some recommendations to the council on particular priorities.
Yeah, I think if we did if we did feel that was important, that's one thing, and really I think it would just benefit us because over the last couple months we've brought up items, even this item on leaf blowers is kind of a asking for a reminder and an update, and it might just be helpful to get a sense of how much bandwidth there might be in the year for extra things and what we're already looking at.
Yeah, that's excellent recommendation.
Through the chair, if I could address that a little bit. I think that's a good idea. I appreciate the effort. I will tell you it's a bit challenging for us to stay on schedule sometimes just because of the needs that we might have. Knowing the items you want to talk about for sure is helpful. And we could try to lay the year out if you would like.
And similarly for the sustainability program, we do follow council direction to some extent of, what items become a priority, but sometimes also items move up in priority based on opportunities that present themselves, whether it's grant funding opportunities or, partnerships that come to us. So it is hard to always advance prioritize. And then as Andrea had mentioned during her presentation earlier, many priorities are multi-year. So for example, the food service ware ordinance, which will be going to council this coming Monday, isn't just adopted and done, the implementation
sure.
work as well.
Yeah, at least if I might comment on that, in fact, for me at least, having the conversation also gives us a sense of what's on deck. So that we're not piling more stuff indiscriminately, which, it's easy for commissioners to do. I say, let's do this. So, I was really interested to hear, for example, Andrea make a reference to, building benchmarking as a potential priority. So just understanding what staff is viewing as particular opportunities and having a little discussion around that, I think would be super helpful.
And just for further clarification, is that something you're specifically interested in as it relates to the sustainability program, or are you looking to hear that also from the Public Works Department? That broadens it significantly.
I'll defer to Commissioner Lorraine in terms of what his original intent was.
I would think I'd be asking both, just because we're a commission that has items from both and our schedule is determined by the items of both. So I could be wrong on that, but I think when I was thinking of what we were just discussing about, getting a sense of what we've already committed to, what we'll likely be working on, and not necessarily tying everything to any particular month or whatever, but I guess I don't see a distinction necessarily. I don't think I'd want to only learn about what the sustainability program is doing.
If I may, I think this is a good idea to help us know what's on the priority list and to make sure that we're not piling additional things that aren't necessarily in our priority. I don't think it needs to be, certainly doesn't have to be month by month or, January this, February. It's generally kind of a general list of what are our priorities for the year, which can absolutely shift, especially when there are opportunity for addressing certain issues. But I'm interested also to hear Commissioner Robbins' thoughts and, of course, the feasibility of this. If other commissions do this, or especially Commissioner Robbins and other commissions that you've served on in the past.
Yeah, I concur with the Vice Chair. I think it's a great idea, and I think it should encompass all of our jurisdiction, if you will. But I also, I think there's we need to hear what are the staff priorities, and then I think we as a commission can throw in what we think would be priorities on top of that. But we should recognize that our role as commissioners is not to dictate. As much as I want those leaf blowers on there, I ain't gonna get it probably, and that's just the way it goes. But I think the real value that could come from this is not only getting us all on a better understanding of what's coming up, knowing that it might change, but if the staff, particularly if the director and basically if Kathy and Brad really can find this useful, in that we can actually show up those goal setting sessions and speak on appropriate subjects rather than just on some wild idea that nobody's going to listen to. Because city council doesn't always get the word from staff. And so we can be very helpful there. And so I think it's generally a good idea as long as we're mindful of our role as commissioners.
We can certainly bring that back in December. We can give an overview of what's currently on the work plans for both the Public Works Department and the Sustainability Program, as well as any preview of items we anticipate being on the work plan for next year that we see coming down the pike, which will be our best guess, of course.
Let me ask Kathy, if I could ask you, the council has their goal setting session at the end of January. Should this discussion be after that, just in case things come up during that time frame, or not?
It really depends on the intent of the commission. If the intent is to bring something forward for consideration for council as part of their goal setting session, then December timeframe makes sense. But if you want to just have a better understanding of what you'll be looking at into the future, then probably waiting till after that and having this discussion in February might make more sense.
So I guess Commissioner Lorraine, which would you prefer?
It's a good question. I think I do think like either one would be valuable. I think at the moment my mind was going toward December with the idea that if since we took this item on as a question of whether we thought it was a council priority, I wondered if what might I be interested in asking the council to prioritize, or I feel like this commission didn't necessarily do that last year, and it may not have to do that this year. It might make sense to wait until after the Blue Sky meeting occurs if staff is already working on its 2021 plan, has its priorities based on the climate action plan, for example, and other multi-year work that Brad has going on in Public Works. That might be sufficient. What do you think, Commissioner Reyes?
I do have an opinion on this. It should definitely be before, but there's nothing to keep, to have us, briefing after to have a sense of where things fell out for those of us who may not have been able to attend the council meeting. But I think having it before and being able to provide some input to the council's process is a good idea and probably should be a general practice.
I think I would agree. I think just the fact that, like, in my mind, before Andrea answered in the item today, for example, it wasn't apparent to me what we might be working on exactly in 2021. And so if there were, it would be great to have a little bit of commissioner input on where things fall, and then there may be an opportunity to discuss that further at the Blue Sky meeting. So I think if there's an opportunity to do it in December, I would in fact prefer that.
I just want to add for a little bit of clarification that at least for the sustainability program, we typically in April, when we give the annual cap update, we sort of present that looking forward of what's upcoming. We can only do that again this December.
Sorry, Kathy, were you?
Oh, so I was just saying, typically the sustainability program at least does give information on what we plan to tackle as part of the climate action plan for the upcoming year as part of the annual review of the climate action plan. We do typically do that every year when we present that to the commission, which I believe is usually April or May.
Right.
Shifts a little bit.
Yeah. So it may not have to be that, perhaps as granular as that, and of course, like in April, it's just a different. I don't know. I mean, if it's not possible, then.
So it sounds like you're interested, or a couple of you are interested in December. The others I haven't chimed in, but we probably have room for that. What I have to bring forward to you is an update on kind of the status of the overview of the Marina Lagoon, how it's operated, the challenges that we have there, some of those issues, and then also kind of a fun item to bring to you is the 8292 landscaping. So just an update on what that's looking like, the public outreach we've done. So I kind of requested that item to be a highlight for my last meeting with you also.
Look forward to it.
It sounds like we'll have the 3 items in December. Great.
Yes.
Are there any other reports and announcements for this evening? All right. Well, with that, thank you everybody for joining this evening, and thank you staff for all of your hard work. And with that, we'll adjourn the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting of November 12th, 2020. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brad and Kathy, for putting up with me.